Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Shalva. I'm a senior here at Penn. And on behalf of everyone who is sponsoring and hosting tonight's event, we just want to thank you so much for joining us. A quick logistical note before we get started. Michael will be signing book plates following the conversation right here, so feel free to form a line afterwards. All of you are entitled to a signed book plate, and then plus the first 100 of you who registered and attended, your free book will be available for pickup here at Penn Hill after Thanksgiving due to supply chain delays, and you'll receive an email with pickup info shortly. We're really sorry.
It's really true.
We're sorry for any inconvenience. We ordered them like 5 weeks ago, so we did our best. So on to tonight. We are so privileged to host the incredible Israeli venture capital investor and author Michael Eisenberg. Among his many, many accomplishments, Michael is co-founder and general partner at Aleph, a VC fund with $550 million under management. Aleph is focused on partnering with great Israeli entrepreneurs to build large, meaningful companies and impactful global brands. Aleph has invested in over 40 companies, including Melio, Lemonade, Bring, JoyTunes, Healthy.io, and Nexar. Prior to Aleph, Michael was a general partner at Benchmark Capital, where he led the investments in Wix, Picture Vision, Shopping.com, and Gigya. Michael has been named to the Forbes Midas list several times and has authored 5 books. Tonight he'll be discussing his most recent book, The Tree of Life and Prosperity, 21st Century Business Principles from the Book of Genesis. Michael lives in Jerusalem with his wife and, yes, 8 children. A couple of quick thank yous. Thank you to the amazing Penn Hill team for making tonight possible, including Rabbi Gabe, Rachel, Jenna, Stephen, Ariel, Moshe, and Joan. Thank you to our sponsors, the Hyman and Jimenez Family Fund and the Singer Foundation. Thank you to our co-hosts, Wharton PVC, Tamid, and Wharton MBA Entrepreneurship Club. And thank you to Andrew Jacobson from Michael's team, who has been immensely helpful in the planning of this event. And of course, last but definitely not least, thank you, Michael, for graciously sharing your time with us this evening. This is really such a treat, and I'll pass the mic to Rabbi Gabe.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Shalva, really, for helping spearhead and vision this event, and for all the groups that helped partner to make this happen. And for folks for whom this is your first time in the building, welcome to Penn Hillel. We're so happy to have you, and we always have a lot going on, and folks are always welcome. Michael, you shared just briefly that you had thought to come to Penn earlier in your career, and it didn't happen that time around, so we're happy to have you on this swing. And I have had a chance to go through the book, and I had not seen a book that had taken on game theory and Machiavelli in the book of Genesis, so very interesting and excited to hear more about that. But I thought just to begin, so that people can learn more about you, and let's start at the beginning. Where are you from? How did you end up in Israel? So a bit of your personal journey, and then also professionally, how did you end up in the world of VC investing in that ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks, Shalva. Thank you, Rabbi Gabe. As you hear from my accent, I'm not Israeli originally. I grew up in New York, more accurately in Manhattan. Like, I never left. Finished high school and college on the island of Manhattan. But after my freshman year of college in 1988, I went to take a gap year in Israel in a place called the Yeshiva, which is a house of Bible study. And 1 year turned into 2 years. The second year was the first Gulf War, which was a searing experience. And after the Gulf War, I found myself in a room with the head of the yeshiva, a rabbi known as Rabbi Amital. And I asked him like this student question, and I was planning on coming back to New York, maybe going to work in Washington, D.C. in politics, maybe going into banking. And I asked him whether, if, like, hypothetically, I moved to Israel, if I came and settled in an unpopulated place, would that be, from a religious perspective, a better thing than going to settle in a populated place like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, which are the main cities? And he looked at me and said, that's complete and total nonsense. You need to move to Israel and set up a factory that will employ 10,000 people to earn an honest and decent living. And it was the first time I heard a spiritual leader, a rabbi in this case, talk about the economy, talk about business and the importance of empowering other people to earn an honest and decent living. And literally, I kid you not, on the spot, I decided I'd move to Israel to try to set up a factory to employ 10,000 people. I came back and finished my college degree. I got married 2 years, and my then wife of 8 weeks and I then got on a plane and moved to Israel. And I started my career in political consulting for a year and a half, which is maybe for a longer conversation. But I did learn that you could not create 10,000 jobs in political consulting. After a year and change, I found myself actually unemployed because governments change in Israel frequently. That's an uncomfortable joke, but it's. But I found myself out of work and couldn't get a job at the time. If you haven't done the military, it was hard to get a job. That's not true anymore. And it was hard, so I decided to start something. Really not out of any enlightened view of the world or great innovation. That something became a merchant bank for tech. How I got to that, maybe if we have time at the end. Merchant bank for tech, and we were really fortunate because the bubble came along and made everyone look like a genius. And so, between 95 and 97, I think we backed 11 companies, took 4 companies public together with the investment bank called Montgomery Securities in San Francisco. And I think 8 out of the 11 companies that we backed went public or got bought. That was no genius, that was called a bubble. And that got my career started. And then I ended up in, my partner and I had a bit of a disagreement. I thought we were lucky, he thought we were successful. And we decided to go different ways, and I ended up at a venture fund called Israel Seed Partners, and then at Benchmark. And then when Benchmark decided, I think correctly, that venture capital is still somewhat of a local business and didn't want to have Europe and Israel. So I stayed on for another bunch of years at Benchmark, kind of the only remaining member of the team to stay. And we agreed that when I was ready to go off on my own, because I really wanted to do Israel, I was after my goal of 10,000, 100,000 jobs. That's what interested me. They'd be supportive, and my partners at Benchmark were unbelievably gracious and wonderful people. And so we started Aleph in 2013 to build large multinational companies and brands out of Israel.
Now, in 2021, you look at the Israeli VC scene and it's well established. When you were starting out 15, 20 years ago, how did America and Europe view Israel as a potential partner and an ecosystem generally?
That's a great question. Not like they do today. I was asked over dinner, like lessons for other up-and-coming ecosystems, which maybe I'll touch at the end. But it was like, the first thing is, Israelis, I think, had no sense of markets. Neither, by the way, financial markets nor customer markets at the time. So you develop technology, you try to sell it, didn't go that well, then you go hire kind of locals here. And there was a giant debate in my early time venture capital. You hire the US CEO, like someone who could talk the language and knew how to tell a story and was familiar with the markets or not. And then the second thing was they just sell their companies early because building this scale company was really difficult for this emerging ecosystem. And that's what happened for a long time. And in fact, for those of you who read the book, 2 of my heroes, Dan Senor and Sol Singer, wrote this book called Startup Nation. They're my heroes, by the way, because how many people in the history of humanity have branded the country? 2 people, Sol Singer and Dan Senor. It's remarkable. And so, in retrospect, they branded this, and I think that was true, by the way, which is because of this, Israelis sold their companies, entrepreneurs sold their companies and sold them too young, candidly. But we lose sight of a very important fact, which is what's changed. And Silicon Valley is now, like, 60 years old, roughly, since kind of the beginning of the venture capital business. Israel is, call it less than 30 at this point, right? A little less than 30. It takes a couple of cycles to train the management talent and to get icons who build big companies that people aspire to be like. Who your icons are is important to your own aspirations. If you didn't grow up watching Derek Jeter, the odds that you want to be a shortstop are low. Same thing if you didn't see someone building a large Israeli company, your aspirations are just lower. And so now we have that, plus we have the management talent after 2 turns of the ecosystem to scale up businesses. And the last thing that happened is the internet, where you can market anything on the internet today, and it's very data-driven rather than personal-driven at this point. And so there's a great New Yorker cartoon back in the 90s which had a dog behind a computer, and the caption was, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And the truth is, on the internet, when you're doing like online marketing, no one knows if you have an accent, or you don't understand their culture, you're just reading the data. And so that's been a huge advantage to Israel. Now we can build these full stack, full scale companies out of Israel, and I think we're in the era of scale-up nation. And that's why all the money's pouring in. For those of you watching the statistics, like Tiger, Insight, General Atlantic, I mean, they're all coming into the country now. And you can, there's way too much money in the system now in general, but all this money can flow to Israel because you can build these full stack companies now in Israel, and it's become a mecca. And there aren't that many around the world.
A lot of the students here, there's a lot of students in Wharton undergrads, and others not. So I think some people will know a general answer to this question, so maybe it'd be helpful, but some won't. So if you could give both a general answer and then a specific answer. Aleph, how would you describe what Aleph does, and more specifically, how does it add value to its portfolio companies?
Okay, in general, we're a venture capital fund. We raise a pool of money, and we invest in companies that hope they become giant home runs. This is a business of home runs. If you make 3 or 4x your money, you won't return your fund because you'll lose 50% of your companies. People like to call it a high-risk business. I don't think that's the right characterization. It's a high uncertainty business, and there's a big difference between risk and uncertainty. And so we get paid to hit out-of-the-park home runs. You got to return 25, 50x on at least one investment for the math to work here. That's at a general level. More specifically, you know, it's funny. I listened to Shalva say before they manage over $500 million, and if I was reading the newspaper today, I'd say pikers. You know, that's small fry in today's venture capital world. There is a big debate, I would say right now, among the people I want to engage in about mega funds, venture capital funds, versus boutiques. We're in the benchmark capital category of boutique funds. Benchmark capital raises a $450 million fund every few years and wants to return significantly large multiples on capital. Others have raised these mega funds now. Andreessen Horowitz raises mega funds. General Catalyst has raised mega funds. Billions of dollars going after venture capital. We're in the benchmark camp, which is we want to be small and nimble, and not just that, we have no hierarchy. We're a partner-only firm. There are no associates, no analysts, no entry-level jobs in the investing sphere, and it's an equal partnership. If you come in as a partner, you're an equal from day one. Modeled right after. You can only do that with small pools of capital that you're trying to hit big multiples on. So, number one, from a value delivery perspective, anyone who meets you can write a check. And that's no small feat, because there are a lot of these funds that kind of call and call and call, and they can't write checks to people who call. And there's a lot of jobs people will go into from here where you do that. And there's value in that. You can learn a lot. But if I'm an entrepreneur, for the most part, I think I want to get a call from someone who can write a check. That's the first thing. The second thing is my partner, Eden, and God bless his soul. When I was recruiting him that we should go do this together, the guy's amazing. He said to me, okay, I got 2 conditions. He says, we're going to be really equal partners. I promise we'll be really equal partners completely and totally. He said, the second thing is, I want to build out a technology platform that the market has never seen before that can track millions of people in networks and be able to predict deals coming in, where we can go get talent from, and whether we can generate sales for our portfolio companies all in an automated fashion. So I said, sure, because I desperately wanted to be my partner. To be perfectly candid, I just assumed it would cost us $3, $4, $5 million in management fee over a few years. It would fizzle out, and we can go home and call it dead. In reality, what happened was he was right. And it's the single largest line item that we spend money on, which is our internal technology infrastructure, and boy, was he right. And so our portfolio companies now access this thing we call it Amplify with a PH. Bad naming after Aleph or whatever. Because it amplifies the values of these technology companies, and we've recruited, I don't know how many engineers to our portfolio companies, but it's a lot. And when you're a startup today, the scarcest resource is not capital, it's engineering and product talent, product management and engineering talent. And we deliver that in bushel loads to our portfolio companies. And our automated system has even found big partners and customers for our companies. And my partner's a genius. That's the truth. A really innovative genius who foresaw this unbelievably well.
Just to follow up on one piece of what you just mentioned, I didn't realize this structure of Aleph being wholly partnered. And was that from the start? Is that ideological? I'd love to hear more on that.
It is ideological. It's also, we think, good business. If you read my book, I think ideology is good business. Equal partnership means no politics. In many venture funds, there's a trade between the partners whenever you raise a new fund over how much carry, which is success fee, you get in the fund based on past track record. When it's equal, there's no politics. So everyone's incentivized to help everybody else out. That's number one. Number two, it reduces the friction. There are no negotiations. So all those unpleasant things you may have to do with your partners over time are gone. And there's only one decision, in or out. The hard part about it, which is ideological, we also think leads to better outcomes, is if you're going to take on a partner, you need to believe that that person has more value than you're giving up, which is your value. So the bar is incredibly high. The hard part about that is it takes years to find another partner. It's a painful process. The good part about it is, at least in theory, you keep the bar really, really high on it. And a big kind of tenet of everything I believe in is alignment. I think it's actually a core biblical value, is alignment. We talk about this, we talk about lemonade at some point, is alignment. And this is a deeply aligned partnership because we're all equal.
You said that ideology is good business. Having read some of your book, I was going to say clearly you believe that values are intertwined, values and ethics are intertwined with good business.
Yeah, what I call timeless principles.
So,
because values has been corrupted as a term.
Well, please share with us first of all, have you always believed that? And how do you, it could be nice to hear some practical, I was going to say tachlis, practical examples.
Tachlis is like Hebrew for like get to the point. Be very practical.
Practical examples of how that has played out in your businesses.
Yeah. So I use the word timeless principles because it prevents relativism. And we live in a world where people think that the kind of values I invented today are more valuable than the things that were invented thousands of years ago, and that we're much smarter. And I prefer what Einstein, who wasn't the first one to say it, by the way, says that we're where we are today because we stand on the shoulders of giants. And I deeply believe that. And a friend of mine, Balaji Srinivasan, remarked around my book that this is like wisdom of the ancients for moderns. And I think there's a lot to learn from this. And these timeless principles, the Bible has had more unique users than Google and Facebook combined over history. And is I think, therefore, an important source of wisdom. Side point, when I launched the book in Hebrew, a couple of years ago, we did a panel with a well-known rabbi in Israel. So somebody asked, what did you learn from the book? He says, in 3,000, 4,000 years, nothing has changed. People are people, business is business, family strife is family strife. Family business is complicated, and innovation and change are constant, and we need to adapt. And so, and I think that's true. So why do principles matter? So let's take an example that's a practical example from investment. So Lemonade, which is now public so everyone can kind of see it. Daniel Schreiber, who was one of the two founders of Lemonade, came and said, I'm going to do peer-to-peer insurance. But his core insight wasn't what he called peer-to-peer insurance. His core insight was insurance is a broken business model from a principles perspective. Why? You get into a car accident, you got a flood in your house, in your greatest time of need, you go to the insurance company and they do everything in their power not to pay your claim. Why? Because they make more money rejecting your claim. It's a really simple incentive system. If I make you miserable, I make more money. And so that's a fundamental misalignment. Dan Ariely is famous for saying that if you wanted to invent a business that brought out the worst in humanity, it would look like insurance does today. So what happens, if I know that the insurance company is incentivized to reject my claim, what I do is I then fraudulently inflate the claim. Because I know they're going to knock me down. And then, something that's supposed to be a social good, right, that's there for you in time of need, we pull resources so they're in time of need, ends up costing much more money because you have to accommodate the fraud because we brought out the worst animal spirits in humanity by this really screwed up system. And so the core insight that Daniel and Shai had was, well, what if we align this and say, we're not going to make any more money by rejecting your claim. We'll take a flat fee for running the pool, the premium pool. And not just that, but insurance is like a victimless crime. Nobody knows who else is, stands behind Progressive or Allstate or Geico. So, people are prepared to do fraud on people that they can't identify as a victim. If you called it, by the way, Shalva Insurance, you'd have a harder time. There's actually been research on this. There'd be a harder time defrauding because there's actually a human being whose name sits there. And so, if we align this business and then said leftover premiums go to charity, not Lemonade's charity, your charity. You want to back the National Kidney Foundation? Back the National Kidney Foundation. You want to back the Red Cross? Back the Red Cross. So if you screw the insurance company, Lemonade in this case, you're really just screwing, your charity. People don't want to be seen as bad people screwing charities. And so they behave better. And so, our renters business is, I think, the most profitable renters business out there because it's aligned. And I think, we've forgotten timeless principles, which is alignment, empower others. I'll give you another example. We have a company that started in Israel. Started focusing on the Israeli market. Let me help you out. For those who don't know, there's less than 10 million people in Israel. It's not a market you normally target. It's just not big enough to move the needle. This company's called Rise Up. It's founded by 3 people, a guy named Yuval Samet, I'll come back to in a second, Tamar Harel Cohen, who immigrated from the UK and Los Angeles, and a guy named Yiftach Bar. Yuval Samet sells his first company to Klarna, which is a big Swedish payments company. It's the largest payments company in Europe now. And says he's coming back to Israel, calls me up, coming back to Israel, and I have an idea. He grew up poor in a place called Petach Tikva in Israel, above the souk, the market in Petach Tikva. And he says, I want to build a financial product that has no money in it to help people get out of overdraft. People who can't finish the month. Haven't you seen it? I haven't seen it myself. There's apparently a Netflix series called The Maid now. Has anyone seen it? One person in the room. All right. So we're going to do this together. But apparently, I've heard that there's a scene in The Maid where The Maid is a story of a woman, apparently, who is a single mom, has a kid, can't make ends meet, goes to work as a maid, and is barely making ends meet. And so she turns up at the supermarket and she's waiting online and is doing a mental accounting of her grocery wagon there. And at the end, kind of figures out she can't afford in her mental accounting and kind of goes on, is there on screen, a few products. And so she has to return herself, and some guy behind her like sneers and snickers at her. Oh, you can't afford that kind of. And so these guys decide that they're going to go after, call it the bottom 50% of earners. That's generally not the best business model for a financial services company. And they said, we can do this. Not only that, we're going to charge a subscription fee to these people because it's going to help them get out of overdraft. And we'll target this small Israeli market. Everyone passed on them, basically. Which, by the way, often makes it a better investment, because if everyone thinks it's impossible, you have real barriers to entry. No one's going to get after you, no competition. And so his insight, Yuval, was like Fitbit gives you one number, how many steps to take. If we gave people one number, because we've all learned that kind of financial literacy is like not a thing, and you can't teach people. And so I'm going to give you one number, how much money you have to spend at the end of the month. And a remarkable thing, thousands and thousands and thousands of people using the Rise Up app, which meets you in iMessage or in WhatsApp or wherever it is, and gives you one number, have gotten out of overdraft and debt in Israel. Thousands of people. And they pay, well over $100 a year, which they didn't have, for a subscription to do this. And we got all their data now, and we're able to help them now lower fees. So we introduced the lowest cost savings product in Israel to all our people. And the uptake is stunning. People who were in overdraft 1 year ago are now committing, like on an IRA basis almost, hundreds of shekels a month to a savings account. And we show them how that compounds and what they can buy with it over time and give them a long-term horizon. We've decided to be what I would call long-term greedy rather than short-term greedy, in that if we empower more people to be on the positive side of the ledger, this is better. I'll tell you something, there's a lot of conversation going on in the US in particular right now, tax the rich, redistribution, all this kind of, it never works. It never ever works. We can debate the ethics of it, it never works. Nobody talks about growing the pie. Rise Up, this company, is growing the pie. When people go from overdraft and taking bad loans and payday loans, which is an epidemic in the United States right now, and puts them over to the plus column so they are empowered, they then also shed the scarcity mindset, which drives people to poor decisions around health, around their own personal finances, and a bunch of other stuff. And if we can help people reclaim a sense of agency, and I can do this, and get out of the scarcity mindset, we'll grow the overall pie. That's good for everyone. That's good for wealthy people, that's good for less wealthy people, that's good for society, that's good for cohesion. We've lost that. And the reason we've lost that is we don't see people. People have become numbers and they sit behind screens. And one of the things I'm after in the book is exactly that. I call it the responsibility economy in the third volume of the book, or the empowerment economy. And here's what we're after. The biblical case says, lift up your brother. Talk to them. In the 21st century, when we talk about redistribution, we're tackling the symptom, not the cause. The symptom is there are people without the skills and the access to technology to get a 21st century job. That's what you got to tackle. The government ain't going to solve it, so you got to solve it, you got to solve it, you got to solve it. Grab 4 people on your shoulders for you to work near the lucky 0.1%, or pen, and take 15 people in the 21st century. It's a civic duty, not even from an altruistic perspective. That's how we grow the economic pie. You can even be self-interested to do that. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Great examples. You noted that you seek alignment.
Yeah.
So often we hear about VCs that look for the right person or the right idea. How do you balance whether it's the person that walks into your office or their idea or their values? How do you see that interplay?
So I'll back up with a story, which is COVID hit and everyone went remote. And I figured out I can't invest remotely. Somebody's going to write an incredible PhD thesis in 10 years on remote investments versus entrepreneurs you met. Until then, we'll have to guess who. But different strokes for different folks. I discovered I can't invest remotely. I think I can't invest remotely because I really don't know anything about markets, and I know even less about technology, and I'm just like a people investor. And if I can't sit with the person and look at them in the eye and read their body language, I'm lost at sea. So if this business ever went fully remote, I'm going to retire. And so I'm definitely the people investor, and look for people who are learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. That's something we said often at Benchmark. Learn-it-alls is a big deal, by the way. Something's been said by others, but has been true for me. I always ask, what do you know that nobody else on the planet knows? Yuval Sam, this guy I mentioned earlier, understood economic empowerment more than anybody on the planet, and what it would take to get there. And so, what do you know that nobody else knows? The third thing I look for is, so the venture capital business, as I mentioned before, it's about uncertainty, not risk. And I think that's a little bit of a misconception that people think it's about risk. Because what really happens is, the venture business is like, if this goes right, and that goes right, and this goes right, and that goes right, and this goes right, and that goes right, each one of these is like 5%, so you multiply 5% times 5% times 5% times 5%, it's a really little number. So you gotta believe that someone can kind of get through all those gates and keep an open mind for like the next big opportunity. And so you need like optimism and resilience to an extreme degree to get through that. And somebody asked me before, I can't remember who it was outside, you want to be like the dumbest guy in the room here, because if you're so smart, you would come up with the idea. But odds are the entrepreneur is smarter than you, so you need to have kind of the humility to understand this guy is way smarter than I am. In some cases that's easy, in some cases that's harder, but it requires unbelievable humility to kind of let these people play it out, because you kind of flirt with death of the business often in this business. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
Fascinating.
Okay.
two ways of approaching college and undergrad time. One is to ensure that you come out on the other end of 4 years with a very clear career path, job locked up, and you know what you're doing. And the other side is a little bit more maybe being open to what comes next. Maybe try this, try this. What would you, what's your wisdom or advice on navigating that tension?
Since I don't know everybody individually in the room, I'm going to be guarded a little bit in that answer. But I'll tell a biblical story. So the Bible describes in Genesis how Abraham, who is an immigrant, comes with mobile wealth. He has gold and silver and cattle. His son Isaac becomes a farmer. And then Isaac's got twin sons. One is a farmer, and one is a mobile wealth guy. He's a hunter. And I think what's being described in this case is times change, and environments change, and our environment changes. Sometimes you're an immigrant, sometimes you settle down. And sometimes mobile or portable wealth is up, and sometimes, you know, as I think as Baron Rothschild said, was blood in the streets by real estate. And sometimes it's technology, and sometimes it's a profession. You know, when I was getting married, everyone asked me, what graduate school are you going to go to? You're going to get a law degree or an accounting degree? No one ever thought I'd be a doctor. And you know, I was going to go into business. Like, what kind of business? Well, I don't know. But I guess I kind of felt, first of all, I learned a great saying when I was in college from a guy named Rabbi Marcone. He used to say that the mind can only absorb what the butt can endure. And my butt couldn't endure going back to school. And so I had to go out and do something and figure it out. And I got a couple of giggles. All right, so and so I was going to have to go figure it out. And you got to know your personality more than anything else. Can you figure it out, or do you need the guardrails of a professional track to go do that? But I'll add something else, which I think times are changing really, really quickly right now. And so the real question to ask is not what profession are you going to versus kind of more figure it out, but what skills do you have and what curiosity do you take with you out of this time to continue to learn and study and try new things. And I think the most important thing we can teach people today is how to fail and be curious about the next step. And that's become like a mantra. They'll fail fast or fail. I don't think it's so much about like saying, wow, failure is really great. It's more about the resilience. It's going to be okay. Stay curious, stay on it, stay after it. Be confident in yourself. So what we really want is people come out of 4 years of Penn with enough self-confidence to get back up and with enough curiosity to look for what the next good thing is.
Beautiful answer. I think with that, I will pause and we will open it up to folks in the audience who have questions, and we'll go from there. I guess you can raise your hand and stand up and project. Yeah.
I was curious.
What's your name, first of all?
Eitan.
Eitan.
You talked about the difference between different size VCs and how you want it to be nimble. I'm curious in what ways you feel like as you grow larger, you kind of lose that sense of being nimble and what you can do to kind of counteract that. Like, where does the loss of nimbleness, what does that come from? Is it like an organization structure?
Yeah. My partner, Eden, who, as I said, is a genius, says, it's, look at the equation, right? I'll get it wrong, but it's something like the amount of mental and communications overhead is the number of people in your organization squared. I once heard that in the context of bureaucracy, that the amount of times you get something to do is the number of bureaucrats squared. But the same thing is kind of true here. So communication overhead is like a big deal. So the more people you have, the more communication overhead. The more people you have in an investment path, the more communication overhead. The other thing I'd tell you is because this is a business of uncertainty, nobody take this the wrong way, because I'm sure many of you are going to be young analysts and associates in venture capital funds or PE funds. But in general, you want to make sure to get a deal through when you're like the young guy or woman there, right? So you take something that's more sure. Whereas in the venture business, what you're looking for is something that's really way out there. And so the more people you layer in, the more odds there are that something that's really wild and out there gets filtered out because it's like implausible. I'm 100% certain that had we had another layer or two inside of Aleph, Rise Up would never get up, would never get through. I'm pretty certain Lemonade would, because someone would have said, nobody gets an insurance license anymore. They would have been right, by the way. So, you know, the odds of getting an insurance license were less than a coin flip for Lemonade. If we got it, we'd be the first one through the gate and have a big barrier of entry. That's a risk, I think, that's harder to take when you're young and new in this business.
Hi there, I'm Jonathan. Thank you for the time today.
Thanks.
You said that product management and that kind of expertise are in short supply. This might be a little bit out of the purview.
Are you one?
I'm an aspiring one, I suppose.
Good, we'll recruit you.
Let's go. All right, let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
But I suppose, what advice, if any, do you have for an aspiring product manager who's interested in moving to Israel?
First of all, come.
You got it.
Second of all, side point, I started a fellowship called Nevo, which takes people who immigrate to Israel and move to Israel, join the high-tech world, and we build them a professional network in Israel with mentors and next jobs and exposure to lots of people. So if you decide to come, send me a note, you're in. Anyone else in the audience too. If you came to the talk, you're in for the fellowship. Do some work in design, I think is a big one. And psychology, which I think is underappreciated when people do product. 2 is understand data at a deep level. And 3, I don't know if you're an engineer.
I am.
Okay, so you don't need to have the next comment, but we'll tell the rest of the audience, which is you need to find a language to talk to engineers in. You get them to do what they do. That's not obvious to all product people. And I think the next thing I would do is, in your case in particular, not you personally, but people getting in, spending summers or some time at one of the larger companies doing product management early in your career actually has real value for them going to a startup. Because there's methodologies there for how you scale it up that are super valuable.
Mike?
Hi, I'm Alex. You had mentioned that you always want to be the least smart person in the room. How do you make sure that after you're in the room with all those smart people, you come out a little bit smarter? And what are you trying to learn from them? And how do you make sure that you're always learning?
Good question. First of all, I read a lot. And when you write books, you actually have to read more. And so I think reading is important. And I'm not talking about, by the way, reading like posts and tweets and even blogs. I mean books. Books are a little out of fashion these days, unfortunately, but they're actually more important today. And by the way, open parentheses, writing is also important. And it's a differentiating skill, product people do. And so I actually have this habit, I don't take notes. It's a habit I developed in yeshiva, actually, because I kept finding I would take notes and never go back to them and lose the main point. And so instead what I do for myself is I'm asking myself throughout a meeting, what is the one most important point in this meeting? Not 3, not 5, 1. And what it's taught me over time is to try to identify what's the one thing that this thing pivots on. That's become like a thing in my career. So I think too many board members at startups are hyperactive, and they drive management nuts. And so I ask myself, what is one thing I can do in a quarter for each company that moves the needle? And I think there's a lot of power in trying to ferret out one thing in every interaction you have, rather than multiple things. If you're the board member, if you're the CEO of the business, you got a whole different kettle of fish, but that's what I try to do.
Michael, give us 1 or 2 book recommendations that something you read in the last couple of years that we should be reading.
1 or 2?
1 or 2. I'm going to make a plug for this one at the end, but.
I think Creativity, Inc. by Ed Catmull, the founder of Pixar, is an unbelievable book. I highly recommend. There's another book by Matt Ridley called The Rational Optimist, even though I pan him for something he says in the book, in my book. Anything written by Matt Ridley should be read. He wrote another book on how innovation happens recently, also excellent. I'm debating whether to recommend this one. There is a book written by a rabbi I had. It's a high-end philosophy called Leaves of Faith, which I highly, highly, highly recommend, about living an ethical life. There's a sequel to it called By His Light, and I highly, highly recommend by Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, Rabbi Dr. Aaron Lichtenstein. He's a doctor of Milton, English literature from Harvard.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Sammy. My question is, nowadays ESG is the next new thing in every single company. How do you really see and find firms that provide real value rather than just marketing value in the ESG world?
Okay, so you're implying that ESG is marketing.
A large
I
part
agree.
of it is.
But just make sure that's what you're implying. Yeah. This is what I was talking about before about kind of modern relativism versus timeless principles. ESG, ESG funds are like investing in Facebook and Google. There's nothing wrong with investing in Facebook and Google, but I'm not sure what that has to do with environmental, social, and governance. I guess it ticks the governance box, but it's ESG. First of all, by the way, it's going to be inflationary. Be very, very clear about that. Be very, very clear about that. It's not about human beings. It's about ticking a relativist values itch. That's not to say, by the way, that we should do something about the climate, but this whole ESG thing is a relativist values itch that is going to leave lots of people behind due to inflation. It's not talked about enough. So that's point one. And so I find, like, anytime there's a buzzword, I run the other way. And ESG has become a buzzword. In fact, I got asked on a board call today whether the attorney suggested that it might become best practice to set up an ESG subcommittee of the board. I said, not this board. Instead, like I say, you really want to look for these timeless values. Now, I keep coming back to the same thing. Whereas the core thing that needs to be in front of us is how do we empower more people to be independently successful. I use a biblical example because I like to use it. So Abraham moves to the land of Israel, and we know very little about him. That he's wealthy, he brings his wealth with him. He brings his wife, he brings some of his groupies that he picked up in his homeland. And there's one other person besides his wife mentioned, and that is his nephew, Lot. And the Bible gives us one biographical fact about Lot, and that is, anyone know? In the whole introduction of this story, we know one biographical fact about Lot, and that is he's an orphan. Orphans in olden times, it's true in modern times in some cases as well, had no way to make money. They didn't have land, they had ancestral land, they couldn't earn a living. And Abraham takes them with him. There's then an economic recession, a famine. And Abraham travels down from the land of Israel, land of Canaan, to Egypt. He does well there too, very well financially, but when they emerge, Lot is independently wealthy as well. So independently wealthy, he can go his own way. And so this, I think, Abrahamic idea of empowering other people to be independently successful, make their own decisions, and have their own mindset that they can grapple with problems is fundamental. And I don't hear anyone talking about it. Instead, we talk about E, S, and G. And I think the best businesses of the 21st century will actually be built around this notion of empowerment. It's not just financial empowerment, by the way. If you think about what Web3 is about, Web3 is an ownership economy that can distribute ownership widely. Can I make a broader philosophical point? Big arc of history, ready? We're in a giant process of diffusion. In the early days, 1,000 years ago, very few people had the knowledge. Priests, people who spoke to God, prophets. Most people were illiterate. They had no knowledge. Fast forward, then we had kind of wider clubs of knowledge, whether it was the church or the rabbis, whatever it is. Most people remained illiterate. I'm not as familiar with what happened in the East, in the Far East. The printing press starts to diffuse knowledge. You have the Reformation, etc. And knowledge becomes more diffuse. The internet is the next level. Knowledge has become ever more diffuse. And by the way, the same is true of property. If you think back to the feudal economy, there were a small number of landowners, and mostly everybody else was a serf, right? And so we've gone through a thousands of years process of diffusion of knowledge, diffusion of ownership, diffusion of economic agency. And that will continue. Compute, if I've got a supercomputer in my pocket called a smartphone, right? By the way, for those of you who don't know, today is the 50th anniversary of the microprocessor. I think it's today. They didn't tell, I think it's the 4004, right? I think it's today. And you know, the microprocessor put a supercomputer over time in everybody's pocket. That's a giant diffusion. And Web3, and it's like, will diffuse ownership and agency ever more. That's the process we're going through. And that enables us to actually think about this notion of enabling other people to be more and more successful in expanding the pie. We've lost sight of the fact, I think I may have said this, that on a macro basis, what were called the Asian tigers once upon a time, are now full-fledged economies that have grown the overall economy of the world dramatically. That's true on a global basis. It's certainly true on a national basis. But instead, we don't spend any time talking about this. How do we move 50% of the population in the 21st century? And I think the businesses, because there's so much transparency right now, and ever more transparency, the businesses that do this will be handsomely rewarded. Those are 21st century businesses.
Thank you. Take one or two more comments. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sophie. I'm an MBA student here, and in our legal studies and business ethics class, we've been having a debate based off of the Jamie Dimon statement at the Business Roundtable of whether the purpose of a corporation is to serve shareholders or stakeholders. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think I deal with this in the book, but the legal definition is right. Why? It's the fiduciary duty of a board to deliver shareholder value. Because it's the only thing that's measurable. And if you want a law, that's the only thing you can really govern people based on. It's a single metric. Jamie, who I know and like and respect, I think is responding to this kind of movement of what they're calling stakeholder capitalism, which I think is ill-defined and even more ill-measured today. And if you can't measure something, it becomes problematic. I have a different view of it. And there's a line I borrowed from a guy named Jeff Swartz. On discussing the book, he says, oh, I get it. This is market caps close social gaps. And I'll repeat it again, market caps close social gaps. What does this mean? We aspire for the exact same thing as the fiduciary duty requires, which is to deliver high returns to shareholders. But we understand that the intentionality of the business matters for the success of achieving that fiduciary duty, creating a bigger market cap. Think Lemonade. It's the fastest growing insurance company in the world by a long shot because its intentionality is in the right place and created alignment. Jamie and many of the banks have a problem. Why? Because they make money by giving loans to people who may or may not be able to pay them back. And that's where they get high interest rates from. In my third book, I have a whole section on the banks, particularly Israeli banks, around this notion of, if we have so much technology, can't we figure out how to give people loans that empower them to be more successful rather than land them in this kind of hamster wheel of debt? We can figure this out today. We have the technology tools to do that. But it's hard. And so, the reason it's hard, maybe quarterly earnings, maybe because of the intentionality of the people we're running these things. And it may also be because we don't have a long-term view. You know, Amazon gets a lot of whooping on Capitol Hill. But Jeff Bezos, since day one, has optimized for the long term. Long-term shareholder value. He took a beating. People forget, Amazon stock was like $1.50 at some point in 2000. They said he was losing money hand over fist, and by the way, his cash flow was totally fine. Right? Never raised any more money after the IPO, except for I think a $400 million debt offering. Took no dilution. Did an unbelievable thing for shareholder value, but he did it over 20 years. But I'd say there's a lot of CEOs out there that don't have the courage to do what Bezos did, which is to take a really long view of shareholder value in this case. And thereby, by the way, Amazon has been hugely deflationary. If you want to know why there has been a lot more inflation despite the money printing, it's because of Bezos and Amazon and technology more broadly, which is hugely deflationary. And Bezos created 300,000 jobs at a time where jobs have been decimated out of thin air. And he took a long-term view. And I think, you know, similar fashion to rise up these other companies I mentioned, they take a long view of this. And I think it's that long view with the right intentionality that lands in the right place.
Last question over here.
I have more time, I think, if you do. I don't know what time it is.
We'll take two more. Oh,
think
yeah,
I
we
lost
have,
my phone.
we have 7 minutes before. So we'll take two.
I have more. I can go over if you want. It's up to
Okay.
you.
Well, maybe we'll formally pause at 8,
Sure.
and then we can regroup.
So my name is Oliver.
What's your name?
Oliver.
Oliver.
Thanks for being here. So I want to build up on that idea of time.
Just take your mask off. It's hard to hear.
Sure. So from what I understand, you mentioned about your portfolio companies are based on Thomas principles and alignment.
Not all of them. I don't get it right all the time. I just want to be clear about that. I try.
Okay, so I'll still continue my question.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's imagine that one of your companies lose alignment, starts not following that idea of Thomas principles, but it actually becomes more profitable.
Yeah.
What are you doing about that?
That's a really great question. So number one, like I said, I try. We don't get it right every time, and sometimes life happens. And I think the question is, what do you do? I'm a board member at the end of the day. I'm not the CEO of the business. I think one of the benefits of being a board member is you can kind of give a different perspective. You're not caught up in the day-to-day, and you kind of take a longer view of it. And that in itself hopefully provides some value. And then you decide. And I think there's 3 decisions. A, it doesn't align with my values. I'll get off the board. I'll remain a shareholder. I don't think I can influence the direction of the company. 2, they're making a lot more money. The values misalignment is not great, but not the end of the world. And I'm going to stick with it. 3, this is so bad, I got to get out of here. That happened to me once, by the way. We started a really, really, really good business. And candidly, through no fault of the CEO or anybody else, the market that we were in turned to be pretty nefarious. And so we sat down as a board and said, and by the way, we were minting money. I say minting money. And we sat down as a board and said, we don't feel good about this. We sold the business at a dramatic discount to get out of it. And so, like a dramatic discount, we left hundreds of millions of dollars on the table, probably, that we could have gushed out through dividends. But we all felt better about ourselves and decided that from a long-term reputation perspective, if we're doing what was right, we should get out of it. It was, but I'm not going to lie to you, it was really difficult. And it's hard. And as a person of faith, what I often say is, God lives in the gray. Most things in life are gray, they're not black and white. And I find God in the gray and try to ask those hard questions. And they're tough, you know. Sometimes the answer, by the way, is you got to replace management. That's also tough. I've had that a few times. And I try to gut check myself on it. Anytime I've got to make a management change, I tend to take a day off sometime before to try to think this through with a clear head. There's a famous description in the Talmud that in the old days when you had capital punishment, I think in some states we still do have capital punishment, the judges would fast and not eat on the day of judgment. And I think that's true when you try to move on someone in management as well. You kind of got to take a day of reflection before you go do it.
Thank you. Let's take one more question.
Yeah, my name is Mitchell. Thank you for your time. It's been really, really informative. So my question was, I know you mentioned that your investments are very people-focused. So I'm wondering if you could walk us through some of the best lessons you've learned, some of your best and worst investments, as far as finding successful founders or people to compete with.
Like I said before, resilience and optimism is definitely curiosity, learn-it-alls, and people with just a different view on a market or a technology or a problem. You know, I'll give you an example from another company of mine called Daisy. It was kind of ideated in my office with this guy, Tom Cohen. He walked in and says, "My building experience in my apartment building sucks. Neighbors don't treat each other well. Everyone suspects the other guy's running off with the maintenance money. It's bad. There's a lack of transparency." And there were all these companies out there, you may have heard of them, Common, et cetera, trying to fix the building experience. But you know, Tom said, they're going about one. They're kind of talking about kind of kumbaya, make the experience better, provide some yoga, make everyone feel better. And he said, no one wants to do the really hard work. You know what the really hard work is? In the budget and the boiler. It's really true though, right? The budget and the boiler. People pay every month. And it's going to some account, no one sees it. It's not a digital experience, they leave in a check, as the case may be. And experience is terrible. You gotta wanna get your hands dirty and manage the money of the building as repairs, and you wanna know when the boiler's gonna break down and send someone down to go fix it. There's a hugely fragmented, really, dirty industry. And he said, we can fix it, but we gotta get our hands dirty. And that was a differentiated view of it. This guy was like an officer in the Israeli Navy. In the Navy, the systems don't run right, the boat sinks, you know? So that's the kind of guy you want touching the budget and the boiler. And I thought that was a really great insight. And so they're adding a building like every 3 or 4 days in Manhattan right now, because they built systems to enable the board to track the budget and make it totally transparent to the residents. Digital payments, people can order services. Hot water doesn't work, someone turns up for the boiler. They brought full transparency in the system, so no one's on the take anymore, there's no cash. And it kind of works, but you got to get your hands dirty for that, and that was a unique insight.
Thank you, Michael, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy, and thank you, Shalva, for really organizing this evening. I'll make another plug for the book. I read several chapters and really fascinating takes on stories I thought I knew very well and some good lessons. We'll formally pause. There are book plates that Michael will sign. You can come up here. And I just want to thank everyone for coming. What an enlightening and fascinating evening. Michael, thank you so much.